Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Candid Conversations with your CPA. Today I have Sara Stewart, a pioneer in cannabis hospitality, as featured in Forbes. Sara, introduce yourself to everybody.
Hey everybody, and thank you for having me today, Raymond. As he mentioned, I have been featured in Forbes as a cannabis hospitality pioneer, I guess you could say. I opened the first consumption lounge in West Hollywood called Lowell Cafe after being in hospitality for about 15 years of my life. I was so fortunate to see firsthand what consumption lounges are going to look like. First to market is first to mistake. And I got to see those mistakes firsthand, and I really wanted to make sure other people weren't going to follow that same path. So I started a consulting company. We have helped several license holders from ideation to business development to even raising money. And so now I am kind of getting out of the consulting realm a little bit more and coming into trying to build out my own lounge concept and also building some software for some operational pain points to make sure the service and the flow, kind of works a little bit better than it is right now.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And yeah, I like the natural transition into, I don't know, trying to create software to solve your own problems. But yeah, respect your background, opening up some of the first lounges. We know it's a license type, so it's becoming much more common, but there's definitely not a lot of active lounges. And then as you've had to raise capital for them, it's an interesting business model. So first to market, first to mistake. Can you tell us just a little bit about the lessons you've learned opening up some of these cannabis consumption lounges in different markets?
Yeah, sometimes, it's operator mistakes. Sometimes it's just regulations that probably city and states haven't thought through before approving these kinds of spaces. The first thing that comes to my mind is, West Hollywood wasn't really allowing us to have water in Lowell Cafe because that is considered food production. And so obviously not being able to serve water or sodas or things in a place where smoke is being consumed was definitely a challenge for us. I think it took a bunch of license holders finally coming together to go to the state to say, hey, you don't do this in hookah lounges, and you don't make other businesses go through this. And so, please help us solve these challenges. And then they finally said, okay, we understand. We will remove this regulation. And so now you can actually serve water much easier in some of these spaces. But the fact that you have to separate cannabis and food on separate checks, and we don't have the ability to create tabs. And we're used to having the reservation platform connected to the point of sale software so that it's communicating. And in the space right now, that doesn't really exist. So there's such a list of needs and operational challenges in this new space. It was just really a challenge and a passion of mine to make sure that not only are we building out new lounges, but we're building out the software to support these lounges to ensure that they're actually profitable and they're not clunky and that they make sense.
No, definitely, definitely. Let's talk through the profitability of some of these lounges and just kind of not in dollars amounts, but just in levers and percentages. So obviously there's a price compression in the cannabis industry. So everybody is, hurting to find profit margins, but just having, I went to college, I served tables during then. Like I just know like the margins in food and bev also, not that high. So I guess what drives the profitability of these? First, just what drives the revenue of these lounges, and then what drives the most profit margin, just given that they're not licensed to cultivate cannabis, manufacture products, and sell it. They're this new license. So, what drives revenue at these consumption lounges or consumption hospitality locations?
I would say, first and foremost, we're thinking about, in terms of the cannabis in general, we're thinking about multi-use servings of cannabis. When we're opening lounges across the country, everyone's selling eighths, they're selling, quarters, they're selling edible packs of 10 edibles sometimes. And you won't go to a bar across the country that's going to hand you a handle unless you're in a nightclub environment. And in that situation, someone's still pouring your drinks for you and monitoring the environment. So for us, first and foremost, it's so easy for us to kind of transition out of multi-use servings and go back into the single serving model, a bottle of wine at a liquor store versus a glass of wine at a restaurant. There is definitely going to be a price difference there. And when you have single serving products, your margins are obviously much higher than they would be if you're selling single or multi-use products. So think tasting flights, maybe half grams each, more joints, more single serving products are going to create higher margins. So, and also allow us to control the environment a little bit easier. So we like to say the first way that they're going to be profitable is higher margins on single serving products. But if you are not if you're not serving food, or if you don't have another revenue stream, we always say hospitality first, cannabis second, business model, then it's definitely going to be very challenging for you to generate money in this space. You know, we're looking at this as just another substance, just a new substance in a familiar environment. So if you're familiar with going to bars, if you're familiar with going to a movie theater, if you're familiar with going to a bowling alley, you're going to see the same revenue streams existing there. Now we're just adding cannabis as a brand new substance, maybe removing alcohol because legally we're not allowed to do that. But cannabis first, hospitality second is always the way that we go. Make sure your revenue streams are strong on your experience first and foremost, and then bring in cannabis as an addition instead of making it the focal point of the establishment.
Because that's where I get confused. Is so if you have a consumption lounge, you're also able to sell cannabis products, which would be great. It's kind of like a dispensary with just a more badass experience area. Or are you only get a consumption lounge and you're not allowed to dispense products? I'm assuming people need to bring in their own products. So how do you delineate between that? Because in my mind, it's like, well, of course I would want to retail with consumption lounge access. Or if I couldn't get retail, like I'll just get consumption lounge, because at the end of the day, it's the same thing. People can come in here and buy products. It just so happens the lounge, I'm going to restrict them a bit more. Obviously, it helps profit margins, and then I need to compensate that restriction with other entertainment. But what is the difference between consumption lounges that can dispense their own products, which is much more like a retail store, or consumption lounges where they can't dispense legal cannabis products?
The ones that can't are such a challenge because, you know, imagine in a bar having a bartender who has no idea what you're actually consuming. It really like takes away from the overall experience, from the ability to control the environment. And there aren't very many BYOB restaurants because
Right.
they really want that revenue. So there are a couple lounges I've encountered across the different states that don't even allow you to dispense products or sell cannabis products in your lounge environment, which is such a huge no-no in my opinion, especially if you have to walk through a retail store to get to a lounge. To me, that's like, as a hospitality person, that's like having to walk through a liquor store to get to a restaurant. And
If it
that,
accomplishes the same thing and they buy in the retail and walk in back into a party zone to consume, I think that's a win. They'll probably buy more. You can sell half grams with higher profit margins. To your point, it's not ideal, but it's just the
yeah,
nature of the cannabis industry. We got to crawl
right.
before we can run, I guess.
Right. And the ones in West Hollywood, the ones that are coming up that are going to actually do well are dispensing cannabis basically tableside like they would bar or like any bar environment. So we are the ones like that I'm working on in West Hollywood. We're not a dispensary in the fact that you can walk in, shop around, see all of our products,
Yeah.
purchase things and leave. But you can sit down for an experience. You can order food and beverage, coffees. Then you can also order cannabis delivered right to your table. You can pay for all of that, and then you can actually take products home with you. So it's kind of like a mini dispensary license where we actually are able to dispense on site, but we're not using it as a quick service retail counter. It's more of just servicing the people that are coming into the establishment to consume.
And I like that just because it reminded me instantly of like, so I was in Europe this year, to some countries for the first time, enjoyed my first time in Amsterdam. But that's pretty chill. It's like, all right, cool. Like honestly, it's real weed, it's a real cafe. I can get real coffee, I can roll real joints outside looking at a canal like this, pretty tranquil. I'll be honest. Like that was quite nice. But like in America, like I know like just like consumption lounges with this mindset just don't quite exist. And like I get the like outside consumption, but even like walking into the dispenser, the cafes, it was very chill. You could order, like to your point, half grams to grams, pre-rolled. We like to roll our own, so we'd order actual flour, break it down. You could get an espresso. So is that kind of what you're trying to recreate here? And like, what is, because I know the licensing again becomes like specific. So do they write in consumption lounges with like various restrictions of you're only allowed to sell X amount of products or these specific SKUs? And again, that's just I'm trying to kind of figure that out. It's like, who decides what type of consumption lounge license it is, and then what type of experience are you trying to create? And I kind of understand what you're explaining with the side, like side table where you order at a table, similar to
Yeah.
Europe, as opposed to like a dispensary where you walk in, whether it's retail or medical, and there's glass cases everywhere. You're in a queue, you go to a kiosk, you order, you walk out. Um, that was kind of a convoluted question. My apologies, but like, how would you say American retail lounges compare to European consumption lounges?
So like you, I actually just got back from Europe. I did go to Amsterdam as well not too long ago. And the cannabis there is definitely not as strong as what we're consuming here in the States. And
Yeah.
so when I'm thinking about normalization, and maybe because I've been in Lowell Cafe, during its grand opening, we saw 1,000 people a day. We had a wait list around the block, and we were selling food and beverage in a normalized environment alongside cannabis sales. And we even had a beer and wine patio. So in terms of normalization, like that's a big word that I use often.
Yeah.
Um, we have to do things a little bit differently than they do in Europe. And I think it's because the strength of the cannabis that we have here in the States, because of our hospitality standards that exist here in the States. And again, like what I said earlier, with overconsumption, it's a real thing. People do overconsume when they're
Totally.
unsure of what they're doing or they're unfamiliar with what they're doing. And so we like to say control is like the name of the game for us. And so what does control look like? It means having a bartender or a bud tender who is selling you the product and also watching you consume that product right in front of your face. If you're purchasing it from another area, or if someone else is leading you through that purchasing process and then you get somewhere else and your server doesn't really know what you've talked about with that person, what you've explained that you like, what you don't like. If you've ordered a Jack Herrera joint and you don't realize that there's a lot of terpenoline in that, and then from another server you order a cup of coffee, that could, bring a lot of anxiety onto somebody. That could make them extremely anxious or nervous. And those are the things we're trying to mitigate in public environments because we want these to be more normalized for the first time. So in terms of the license types, it's really, a lot of states are jumping in and creating the lounge regulations. Nevada did that. They did a full state regulation for consumption lounges, whereas in California, it's mainly up to the cities. And so West Hollywood, in terms of all of LA County, West Hollywood's the only city that actually allows for on-site consumption. And they have a couple different license types. They have licenses that can be all smoking. They have license types that are connected to retail stores. And then they have license types that are basically 50% of the space is edibles only. And they did that to really kind of diversify the experience that people are going to try to be creating. Obviously, for us, edibles only lounges are a little difficult and challenging because we sell edibles in multi-use packs. So we're looking at those experiences as beverage bars, THC drinks, low dose beverages, the healthiest kind of bars in town, and trying to create a familiar environment for people. Instead of drinking alcohol now, you're drinking THC, but the space and everything still feels like American hospitality standards. So, I think there's a couple ways to answer that, but it definitely goes into the tolerance levels of most people coming here. At Lowell Cafe, we saw parent teacher conferences, people coming in with their whole entire family, grannies and their grandkids coming in to consume together. And for me, that just really opened my eyes on everybody is willing to come to these spaces as long as they are familiar to them in some kind of way, normalized, if you will. And that's really kind of where I keep my eyes on hospitality first, because I really want to make this, better than some restaurants in town. And then you get there and then you're like, oh, there is no alcohol here. This is actually a cannabis beverage or an adaptogen bar or something first and foremost.
Because it is because that's what kind of be my next question. Like along the normalization thread, like hemp beverages and just hemp products being able to be sold in all 50 states more or less, and like get like I'm in Wisconsin, we don't have a medical program yet, so it's just like I don't know, hemp is fairly common around here. And I get it, there's the whole other issue of like supply chain, compliance and control, but it is a way that everything's normalizing. And even just the beverage side of, you either had alcoholic or non-alcoholic beverages, at these venues predominantly. And
Yep.
so it's interesting to have non-alcoholic beverages instead of just being water, soda, or a mocktail. Now is going to include intoxicating cannabis beverages, which is great because it still gives you that camaraderie feeling, still allows you to put your guard down a little bit, which is kind of like the goal of socializing with people.
Yep.
So do you see any of that kind of, I guess like that all just does play into it, but how hard is it to get, where I was going with all this is like, it's hard to get a cannabis license. It's also hard to get a, like an alcohol license, at least to distribute alcohol, whether you're a bar owner or a liquor store owner. And combining the two, it's like, I'm sure every city has their own worries about that. So in California, have they done any combined use bars yet where it's actual alcohol consumption with actual food, like a real restaurant with actual flower cannabis smoking? Is that a thing
Uh,
yet?
and and Lowell did, I mean, yes and no. We have basically parsed it
I'm
off
all
these
for workarounds.
APN.
Like I know we got to section things off, but can it be owned by
Exactly.
one ownership group? And if we section things correctly, we can get all three parties going at once.
Exactly. It's all about APN separation. If you have a cannabis license here, but your food and beverage license is here, I mean your food and beverage kitchen is here and you're throwing a liquor license on, as long as that's like a delivery from one APN to the other, you can get around those things. In terms of them being consumed in the same environment, we have not seen that yet. Although there are a few, like GTI did a concert series in Illinois where they allowed guests to bring in their cannabis, and then there were alcohol vendors on site and you could consume both in the same environment. And that was, brand new, that we haven't really seen much people doing much. And then I have a friend who's building a consumption lounge in Muskegon, Michigan, and it's going to be called Fields Cannery, and he is allowed to have consumption in the same area, but not purchasing. So once that comes online, it's going to be really interesting to see what that looks like for the first time. And even
Oh,
the
for sure.
project I'm working on in West Hollywood is like, they're right next to each other, the alcohol and the cannabis, but we can't merge them just yet. I think the easiest place to do that will be beverages first and foremost. THC beverages served along alcohol, but in terms of physically smoking, I think we're a little bit of a ways off from that. I hope not, but I think the way that everything's moving in the industry, that's how it'll go for a while.
Yeah, it's like we got to crawl before we can run. And no, because
Yeah.
I was thinking of Fields Canary or the cannery I
Yep.
had over there in Michigan, because it's like I'm right across the pond. So I've been watching that kind of develop kind of one step by one step. And it's because it is interesting to me. It's like Wisconsin, there's definitely a bar culture. Everybody smokes cigarettes and drinks, but for sure, like hemp beverages are becoming more common. Minnesota here, so everybody's already again that normalization of like people are getting used to normalizing. So whereas like people would care if you smoked a joint outside, like now it's just becoming more and more common, and it's just like at some point, because the music venues, I love music. I go to a lot of hip hop shows in Milwaukee. We have the Rave Eagles Ballroom, and like for sure when we go there, it's like everybody's lighting up. And so I kind of just chuckle. It's like, well, these hospitality places already exist where no one's going to yell at you. There's hundreds of people here consuming. We're watching Bone Thugs and Harmony. It's once in a lifetime opportunity. I'm having a great time and no one cares. And like, so these music venues that are cannabis friendly already exist, and they kind of just, they own the liquor license, they own the music venue. They just don't really enforce people consuming cannabis during a hip hop concert. Makes sense. So I don't know. It just kind of already makes sense. We're so close there. We just need to like legalize a few licenses, and then people don't need to worry about getting hassled. But just that
Totally.
normalization process, just got to
It
keep
is.
through it.
And a lot of people, like in West Hollywood, it's so interesting. Concert venues, you typically pretty lax. Nightclubs, bars, not so much. They're
Yeah.
afraid of losing their liquor license for letting you consume on site. But I know that there's places that are starting to open up certain areas or being more cannabis friendly on their patios. But we unfortunately don't have hemp beverages in the state of California. So even our low dose beverage bar is going to have to all be through the supply chain, which, as you know, everybody's leaving the supply chain if you're a low dose beverage to go to the hemp market. So that is probably our biggest challenge right now, is just
Yeah.
begging people to stick around so that we can, have viable options for people.
Yeah, yeah. And then it's like there's such good like low dose bevs that like what are you gonna do? Sell a 100 milligram beverage and have people dose it out like you're at a nightclub like cocktail
Yeah.
style? It's like it'd be
You can't
foolish.
even do that. It's illegal, but we're actually not even going to sell more than probably 5 milligrams per beverage, because our goal is to like use it as a light beer. If you're a beverage consumer, typically you can also be smoking as well. So people could be drinking a drink as they're hitting a dab, as they're smoking a joint. And so we don't want to like overdo it. We also want you to have to purchase 2 or 3 to feel the effects of that. And we've learned from experience, if you give people 10 milligrams all at once, even sometimes they won't order anything else.
That's fair. That's fair. Huh. Man, I like it. I like it. And then not to get too much into the kind of just what scenarios could play out because to your point, it's still kind of playing out in real time. But on that point, obviously I know kind of we were mentioning off camera, you're kind of going through the process yourself of potentially opening up a lounge in California. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And then kind of we can segue into the software and how that's all going to work together of like solve this problem. Now you have a lounge. Now we have the software that can make it all work together smoothly. But just tell us about the lounge first and the process of licensing, real estate, capital, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so there a lot of licenses in West Hollywood have been forfeited. They've moved ownership. These licenses were awarded in 2018, and it is almost 2025, and we've only got 4 up and running. They're not the greatest, I will be honest. There are some people who have built beautiful spaces, but the operations just don't really add up to the experience. They're not hospitality people. Sometimes, unfortunately, these licenses are in the wrong hands, I say often, because if you're a liquor store owner and someone tells you to build a restaurant, it doesn't contain the same skill sets. And it's the same with dispensary retail owners. They don't really have that hospitality background. So we're very fortunate. We have a business partner who's a landlord, but he's also a cannabis retailer. He's got 3 different locations, and he and I are working on a pretty solid business plan right now that we're starting to pitch to investors around mainly like a wellness focused entertainment complex in West Hollywood. In LA, 1 in every 18 people are millionaires. Pretty crazy fact that I learned recently. And everyone seems to be drinking less alcohol in California. Cali sober is like such a real thing here. And so we wanted to figure out a way to kind of reach this target demographic that I feel like maybe I'm a part of in terms of the health and wellness side of life, and alternative, natural medicine, which kind of goes right in hand with wellness as well. So our goal is to kind of create, like I said earlier, the healthiest bar in town. We also are going to have live music and entertainment. I've been in LA hospitality for 15 years, and after COVID, a lot of things here are not the same. There's not as much live music. All of the nightlife is very stale. It's all the same in terms of sound and offering. And so I was going into this next project, not like, let me build a consumption lounge, but let me like bridge some gaps in the market in LA right now before the Olympics and the World Cup and the Super Bowl all come here before 2028. The whole world is going to be looking at Los Angeles. And I really wanted to make sure that we were not just only showing up from a cannabis consumption lounge standpoint, but for what hospitality looks like in the States, especially a place like Los Angeles. And
Mm-hmm.
so our goal is really to create a normalized experience where maybe you're going out to dinner and we don't have any seed oils in our food. Most of the things we're offering is gluten-free or dairy-free, and you would never even know, because I have food allergies myself, and I hate going out to dinner and feeling terrible after I've had an amazing meal that tastes good, because I'm eating things I shouldn't be eating. or because, health is wealth, and in your gut and your mind are so connected. And so our focus has been on how do we create wellness in hospitality and entertainment, and then bring in cannabis as a brand new substance. And so we have a food scientist on board, and we're really trying to figure out, maybe there's a way to create the first like wellness-based entertainment complex in the country. And what does that mean for us, from adaptogen drinks to superfoods to, like I said, no seed oils on site. And there's a few places in LA that are absolutely crushing by having this kind of business model, and there aren't very many of them. So we wanted to kind of come into this space, be able to provide people a sulfate-free wine if you're looking for an alcoholic beverage, but then a THC beverage or a joint if you're looking to consume cannabis. And we've got like 4 concepts within this kind of campus that we're building right now, and they'll all have like a different theme, a different concept, but one side of the building is more focused on alcohol and food and beverage, and the other side is focused on entertainment experiences in cannabis. And so they're connected by a courtyard. So we're going to try to bring all of that together in a cohesive way to kind of keep people on site as long as possible. And we always say, like, choose your experience when you come on site.
No, and I would say people even in the same friend group would maybe choose different experiences, come back together, separate to different experiences. And I kind of see that as well. Like cannabis, it's going to, in my mind, even on the rec side, will still roll up under the health and wellness industry as a whole, just because health and wellness as an industry, it's much, much larger and massive just in sheer size than the tiny cannabis industry as we know it in the United States. And it is, I don't know, I think of it as a much healthier alternative. And then also just like dating somebody who's gluten free and doesn't drink alcohol the last year, it's like my world's opening up to this like whole culture of gluten free, non-alcoholic, all the experiences, because a lot of them are fun. You don't need alcohol to have fun. And so
Yes.
it's, yeah, but it doesn't help to have mind altering substances. And so it's like just this weird thing because we all have insecurities and we all have these own stories in our head. And so, no, it's definitely becoming much more common. And I like the health and wellness kind of angle you're taking it. On that note, just being mindful of time, kind of looking forward to the end of this year, moving. And I like your idea of like long term. It's like 2028, like we need this all dialed in. It's like I like a good long term business plan. It shows kind of thoughtfulness on the founders. So, on that note of looking to the future, what are your plans for MJ BizCon and the software side? And because I know those kind of go hand in hand, and then plans for 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, so the software is being built out with some of the early founders of Micros, which is, or early I guess, brains at Micros. And that is a very, very credible food and beverage hospitality point of sale system that's existed for many years. And a lot of businesses have built other point of sale systems based on Micros. So to be able to partner with them to build out like a hospitality front-facing operation system that connects to metric compliant point of sale systems for retail has allowed us to control the environment more. You can check into a reservation and check into metric at the same time. We have like individual tolerance levels for each person, and we can see their face and how much they've ordered and create those running tabs for them. So we're putting cannabis and food on the same check compliantly. And then on the back end, it separates everything. So that helps the venue with turnover rates and employees not being tipped correctly and flow of service. And it also helps with the clunkiness of having to tip and tax and be paid and pay twice, which nobody likes to do. And so a lot of these lounges aren't even going to be able to operate efficiently if they don't have hospitality driven platforms to service them. And so we're really excited to be building this out and hopefully help every single lounge across the country. I'm going to be representing them at MJ BizCon this year and really just talking a lot to tech people, to other consumption lounges, to retailers who maybe don't understand how their lounge could be built out or ran. And we're going to be showing them more options and solutions. And so we're really excited about that. We're also going to start raising money because we are in beta, a little bit of a beta demo stage right now, but we want to be able to cater to each lounge individually. Regulations across different states are so drastically different. We want to make sure we're covering all of our bases with that. And, into 2025, it's going to be off to the races for us in terms of getting this software up and running. And next steps and fundraising for this lounge project that we have in West Hollywood. So if anybody is looking to invest in a lounge in West Hollywood, that's really where a lot of my attention is going to go.
No, that makes sense. And the final question, just because I nerd out on this stuff, but we need more lounges open to then buy the software to make the software company viable. Like, how long do you think? Because I also believe lounges will become very common in the United States. Just how like beer gardens in Milwaukee, like weren't a thing 10 years ago, but they were 50 years ago. And now that they came back, everybody loves drinking beer in the park and like the county makes money. But anyways, didn't exist. Now beer gardens very common. I think the same will happen with these consumption lounges that are a hospitality first focus. To your point, I think that's really the only way to make them profitable is to have like actually more of a hospitality normalization, and then they're also canna friendly. But how long do you think until there's just more of these states that are for sure doing adult use? I assume will be the first ones to open up consumption lounges, but like how long until it's just commonplace in at least these adult use markets, and at least as commonplace as cannabis can be? I know that's like a loaded question.
You know, it's so hard because I have been such ahead of this curve for such a long time. I'm just like so early to the party waiting for people to show up. But I get a lot of excitement when I talk to new states like Massachusetts who are interested in hearing from us and interested in how to roll this out correctly and want to do a good job from the beginning, because most states roll this out without ever talking to operators or other consumption lounges. And so we have to rechange those regulations several times to even get the right formula in
No
place.
water one. That seems like a clear miss. I'm like, you can't just have
Right,
everybody walk around with cotton mouth. Like this
right,
isn't gonna
right.
work.
So
Okay, so
I
something to
want
come.
to say 5 years, 10 years, but it's really so, maybe with federal legalization that will change and things can move a lot quicker. But
Mhm.
as it stands right now, with the slowness and the fact that, West Hollywood started in 2018 and we're still trying to figure this out, I'm not holding my breath on many other states coming online, except for Nevada has a really great lounge program as well. And if those licenses get into the right hands, I could see Nevada taking off with these two.
No, that's awesome. And kind of wrap things up. It is interesting. Yeah, getting the licenses into the right hands, it is an important part. And it does, and it's not just one hand, it's a group of hands and like people that
Yeah.
have both the hospitality background, that cannabis background, the business background. No, makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Alrighty. On that note, just tell people where you'll be going forward, if there's any other projects or places to find you. And yeah, where can people find you going forward?
You can find me on LinkedIn for sure. I'm definitely trying to keep the consumption lounge conversation alive there. I'm going to be at MJ BizCon this year. If anybody's going to be around, very excited. And I'm focused in LA, but doing a lot of consulting projects here and there across the country, and hopefully beyond. I mean, mainly LinkedIn is my place to be, or I guess Instagram as well.
Hey, that's fair. I'm a modern man. I'm there as well, so I hear you. And man, I can nerd out on this as well, but I want to be mindful of your time, Sarah. I'm sure we'll cross paths in MJ BizCon, and just thanks again for letting everybody know where the consumption lounges are at. I know we're still a little bit early to the party. I feel like everybody in cannabis feels that way about every business model, but we're moving things forward, and that's kind of the name of the game. So again, just thanks for everything that you've done and that you're doing. Be well.
Much. Thanks for having me.